Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Geneva Center for Security Policy public discussion on ecological threats and resilience, mapping today's fragility spots. Welcome to the audience here in the room, as well as to those of you who are joining us online. Hello. My name is Anna Brach. I'm the head of human security and planetary resilience at the GCSP, and I have the pleasure and privilege to moderate this discussion. This conversation is part of the Ecological Threat Report Series, dedicated to discussing the key findings of the 2025 edition of the ETR. We are about to look at the links between ecological threats, resilience, and peace in the context of water security. These links are even more important in times of upheaval and lack of leadership in addressing ecological threats and their impact on peace and security. By now, we should all be aware that ecological threats will not take a break while we take care of other security challenges. The present report it discusses the results of a kind of long-term study on water security. And to discuss those results, we have an excellent panel of speakers. First, we will hear from Serge Strobantz, who is the Director of Europe and MENA region at the Institute for Economics and Peace. He has over 25 years of military career, including several military operations in Balkans and Africa, NATO response force, and EU battle groups. He then shifted to academia, where he specializes in political science, international relations, security and defense, global risk analysis, foresight and crisis management. So a lot of hats there. And Serge is going to present to us the findings of the latest report. Next, we will hear from Dr. Laura Turley, who's a senior science policy manager at the Geneva Water Hub, just next door from us. And this is a center of competence on water for peace, situated between the University of Geneva and the World Meteorological Organization. She brings her expertise in water governance and related policy fields, including over 10 years with the International Institute for Sustainable Development and advisory work with international partners such as WWF, the World Bank, and UN agencies. And last but not the least, we have had a last-minute change as Ambassador Nahida Sobhan, the permanent representative of Bangladesh, is not available, but we are very lucky to have with us her colleague, Mr. Sabuj Ahmed, and he is joining the discussion. He's counselor at the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh at the United Nations Office at Geneva, where he leads on climate change and environment-related issues, alongside other portfolios, of course. A career diplomat who joined the Bangladesh Foreign Service in 2012. He has served at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Dhaka and held overseas posting in Ankara in Turkey. His participation in this discussion is especially significant because Bangladesh is living through the experience of climate and ecological pressures, from water stress and extreme weather shocks to human impacts such as displacement. I think that it will be an essential voice in this discussion and contribution to the discussion on global issues and how ecological risks intersect with resilience and peace. This event runs in parallel with the World Economic Forum in Davos. And the Global Risk Report 2026 is a timely reminder that while geopolitical and economic pressures are increasingly dominating leaders' attention in the near term, environmental risks continue to rank among the most severe global threats over the decade ahead. Against this backdrop, I would very much value your reflections of the panel, but also of the audience here in the room and online, how we can sustain political focus and investment on ecological and climate priorities, not just as a side agenda, but as a core pillar of long-term resilience and security. Now to our panel, we are going to first hear from Serge, then turn to Laura for her insights, and then ask Sabuj to continue with the perspective from Bangladesh. And then I will turn to you, the audience here in the room, but also online, for your questions and comments. So Serge, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, for organizing again, together with the Institute for Economics and Peace, this presentation, and also to my fellow panelists to basically enrich the discussion that we will have today. First of all, I would like to welcome you again in the human security bubble. You know, it's like something which doesn't happen too often nowadays. Last year, so I'm talking all the time, I'm speaking to people all the time, giving lectures, presentations like this. Last year, only 2 people asked me a question about human security in the Q&A after the same lecture, somewhere in September, October. And I really noticed it to say like, oh, first time since January 25, that somebody is asking me something about gender equality and somebody is asking me something about climate security, or at least the impact of climate change. So we tend to forget that this is a risk, this is a potential accelerator to conflict, and that is something which is impacting us every day. And it's not something which basically sprouts in the mind of a world leader as potentially, you know, being necessary to bring to the agenda. It is something which is there, which we need to take into account. And it's really, I think it's really absolutely negative to see the complete disregard to human security and to those different risks which are at the heart of, I would say, even hard security nowadays. So what I will do today is basically privilege the dialogue, privilege also your interventions. And instead of giving you a lot of different graphs going in all directions, what I want to do is basically take the work that we did at my office in Brussels and really look at the results, the trends, water risk, rainfall continuity, and potential shared war systems. So I'm going to give you basically maybe more details, read a little bit more details, but make sure that you get the information necessary to basically have an excellent discussion afterwards. So first of all, what is the Ecological Threat Report? Well, that is a report which is looking at the interplay between ecological threats on one hand and levels of resilience by countries to absorb those shocks, absorb those threats. So what are the ecological threats we're looking at? On one hand, we look at water scarcity and food scarcity, both are connected, and we connect that to the demographic evolution. So basically, the demand and also the availability of the goods. And on the other hand, we look at the impact of natural disasters such as floods, droughts, rising temperature, wildfires, this kind of stuff. So basically the ecological impact. And on the other hand, we use our positive peace index, which is measuring resilience of societies to basically be able to absorb those shocks. So that's the interplay we're looking at. And so we measure those ecological threats as potential structural risk multipliers rather than direct impact on creating conflict. So we see that either it's going to trigger, accelerate, or at least form an environment together with other strategic factors influencing peace and security, such as a social approach, political approach, economic conditions. This is all together going to create a conflict. So we don't see this as a conflict creator, a conflict trigger, accelerator, or framer that is potentially there. We've seen that the Global Ecological Threat Report in the past 5 years, so basically between 2019 and 2024, rose by, so the global ecological threat levels rose by 0.8%. So for us, this is very significant because we see, especially when we talk about ecological degradation, ecological threats, so climate change, we see that this is something very systemic, which needs time really to, you know, when we talk about the demographic evolution or this impact, this is very systemic. So usually it takes a lot of time to see an evolution in those figures. So seeing 0.8% rise in global ecological threats, this is really, really significant. 96 countries deteriorated on the report, 74 increased. So we measure about 172 countries, more than 3,600 what we call administrative units. So that's 1 or 2 levels under the national level. And we see there that the majority of those countries are decreasing basically in their position. So it's worse than it was the years before. Africa is still the global, and I would even say sub-Saharan Africa is the global epicenter. So this is where we have about 80% of what we call those hotspot countries. That would be countries which are absolutely exposed and absolutely not resilient. So basically on both extremes, on the two measurements that we do. So 80% of them are there. We find a couple back also in the MENA region, and then of course a couple in South Asia also. So when we look at the improvements and iteration, so what we see is basically a casual improvement for Central and Western Europe after, a year of a lot of drought in 2019. We have seen that the years after that, there was basically coming back to some normal. But that's basically casual. That's not something that is now structural or a movement. It's just like we come back to what was, and we identify that 2019 was really a year in which we were really impacted. But we don't see an improvement. We basically don't see a return on the investment that we would make in, combating climate change. While in Northwestern and Western Africa, we see that the sharpest deteriorations. A country like Niger, for example, is really one of the most impacted countries in the world as we see today. And then, of course, as I said to you before, just add the political turmoil that is over there, potential for conflict coming, from the countries around, social issues, economic issues, religious, whatever you want to add to the fact that there is ecological threats or impact, that's going to accelerate or create a conflict also. So we have seen, of course, in that part of the world, droughts, heat waves, erratic rainfall, weak water infrastructure. So we see a lot of countries, and I think for me, like one example which always stuck to my mind was Zambia. Zambia, there is more than enough water, right? Especially through rainfall, through the presence of water. But still there is water stress for a lot of people. Why? Because the entire infrastructure from captation, management, distribution, recycling is not present. So when you look at water stress, it can come either from the absence of water or the lack of capacity to do all those different steps in the production, the captation, the production, distribution, recycling from water also. So you need to have a double approach over there. And then, of course, we see countries in North Africa, like Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, being really exposed to the same type of threats. I remember being in November 2024, the taxi drivers, those are people who always give you the best information. So I'm in the taxi there back to the airport, and I was like, it was like a little drizzle. I said, it's raining again. He said, no, it's not raining again. It doesn't rain for 6 months. This is nothing. That's like 5 minutes. So you could really see the water stress. In Rabat, you can really see the water stress over there. And so that is something which is systemic. So for those who followed the African Cup of Nations, raining all the time. So that's not usual for Morocco, right? So that's something completely unusual for Morocco. So that's when you need to focus on. So what we see also, and I think that's important, is that 13.7%, so about 14% of all regions in the world are linked with a score above 3.8 out of 5. So really acute ecological threats or ecological pressure. So what we see there is that today, in those areas, it's about 930 million people. And this is going to escalate to 1.4 billion people by 2050. So we already see today that around 1 billion people going to around 1.5 billion people are really in those most exposed areas. So you might know that Africa is the continent which is going to see the largest demographic evolution. Some countries are going to double their population by 2050. A country like Niger, which I mentioned before as most exposed, is still foreseen to almost triple its population by 2050. So I guess we need to understand that it's already very difficult today and that all the signs are not going in the right direction when you look at this. Talking about food insecurity to continue, of course, we've seen that during COVID-19, disruptions, potential conflict, of course, economic downfall, we have seen that the level of food insecurity really rose during COVID-19. You need to know that this movement, which basically was a change in trend, started 2-3 years before that, around 2016, 2017. We have seen a stabilization by 2021, so after COVID, but we will never, now we know that this inequality, we will never come back to the figures previous COVID-19. So we had an increase in food insecurity. This is going to continue. This is still there as we are speaking. I think, so some country, of course, again, Sub-Saharan Africa, and you always need to put in relationship, and I think that's one of the great things we are doing with this Ecological Threat Report. In this first family of ecological threats, we look at the presence of, food and water, but we link it to the demographic evolution. So we can clearly see that, access to water and access to food, the production of food is getting under pressure, while the number of people who need it is, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, increasing dramatically also at the same moment. So that's really one of the figures, or at least one of the information that you should, I would say, retain from my intervention this morning. When we look at agriculture, we see that in sub-Saharan Africa, this represents around 17% of GDP for sub-Saharan African countries. So that's a large portion of your GDP, which is dedicated to only one aspect. And that aspect is under exposure and under pressure of all the threats that I mentioned to you before. So those droughts, rainfall, whatever you can put under ecological threats and degradation are present in sub-Saharan Africa with, as I said, 80% of the hotspots. So realizing that about close to 20%, 1/5 of your GDP, it's basically, one of the main elements of your GDP is under this exposure and under the pressure of those ecological degradation. So when we look at water risk and freshwater availability, we see that the ETR is defining water risk as the reliability of access to safe drinking water, combining two things. First of all, long-term access levels with exposure to extreme monthly rainfall deficits. So what is there? What can I capture? And then the problem is, we see that for many countries, I would say the amount of rainfall has not really evolved over the years, but the way it's coming down has evolved over the years. So where you had like a normal dry season and a rainy season before, so now you see a much more erratic pattern of this rainfall. So these traditional ways of capturing water or working with water, or also doing agriculture, is getting under pressure because this rainfall is becoming much more erratic than it was before. And so you need to, I would say, almost transform ancestral and traditional ways to deal with the resource, and also the work with the resource is completely different than it was before. We see also that water threats emerge from both environment and a human factor, what I just explained to you before. So access the water is becoming more and more complicated, but it's how you basically deal with it, which is also going to basically impact the way you look at water. So we see that water risk is most severe in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and South America also. The dependence on groundwater further compounds vulnerability. There again, you need to be able to access it. Usually, you need to have energy also to do that. You need to have certain tools. You need to have certain approaches, certain levels of knowledge. So all those different things, which can be seen as potential risk, also in this water stress to which you are exposed. We see that, we can talk about aquifers also, but I think I have better specialists next to me, access to that, the number of people. And I think that's what also strikes me when I look at the Ecological Threat Report, is understanding how many billion people, and we're really talking about a third of the world population, are already being exposed to this water stress at the moment. So just imagine what I said before about food insecurity, about water stress, and take this population. So about 1/3 of the population, more than 1/3 of the population, is already living under those circumstances. So when we look at rainfall continuity and conflict, I already spoke about these precipitation patterns, which are shifting globally, with rainfall increasingly being concentrated in fewer months of the year. So therefore, wet seasons are completely different, and the way you deal with water is also completely different. There also we see that more as a risk multiplier rather than, and I explained to you risk to what? Risk to the waste, risk to the production, risk to your GDP, part of GDP. So that's definitely what it is. And you need to continue to see this always in correlation with other factors, such as political, economic, demographic conditions, which will then shape this stress completely differently. Because some people might lose their job, get into more difficulties, or you might see another pattern where, and that's something which over the years we have seen emerging also in Africa, is basically this fight for access to some parts of terrain, but also the water that is available on it. And then when we see there, and I think you're going to like this, we also see some form of gender inequality in the way this is approached, because you mostly see then that I would say women would access the resource that is still there. It's getting more and more difficult and dangerous to access also, while men would start protecting access to that resource also. So we see that just starting from the point of view or the approach or the angle of approach of water, you can easily identify how this is impacting the communities that have to deal with it in those different aspects or through the lens of those different strategic factors influencing I would say peace and security. There again, most global food production remains dependent on rainfall. That's what it is. I remember, before I worked for the Institute for Economics and Peace, I was a professor at the Defense College in Brussels, and I always invited like a professor, from a university in Brussels. And I remember the guy was showing us, and he had those slides for every crop. And it was showing, so for example, production of wheat in the world. So he's doing world map, production of wheat. And then you see it like, everywhere, even in the Australian desert, right? Or in Australia, they were producing wheat. And then, so this was yellow, 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 yellow all over the world. And then the next picture that he would show us was without irrigation. A white map. So you see that when you talk about the water stress, it's of course water stress for human consumption, but also for human consumption through the production of food and the production of crops also. And this irrigation is really impactful throughout the world in all different regions. And there also we can think back about the technology that has to be put in place. So. So maybe a side note, so the Karamoja cluster in East Africa is profiled in the 2025 Ecological Threat Report as an illustration of how ecological stress interacts with local conflict dynamics also. So for those who are really interested, everything I'm talking about, the full report, even a PowerPoint is available on our website, visionofhumanity.org, so you can access all the research we're doing there, and you can go deeper into the topic that I'm discussing today. The last point that I want to talk about is maybe, but I'm not going to say a lot, because we collaborated together with the Geneva Water Hub in research for the World Bank, looking at, I've been talking for 10, 15 minutes, way too long. 10, 15 minutes about the potential for conflict, the difficulties that these ecological degradations can create, focus on water and everything. So if I would stop now, you would walk out this room thinking like, when is the next water conflict going to start? Or when are we going to war for water? This has been announced for 20, 30 years. Well, figures are basically, when we look at global freshwater availability and water-related conflict, the figures are showing something completely different. So what we also see is that, and that's a research we did since the 1950s, we see that basically people come together and negotiate access to water when it is necessary. So we have seen that many more potential conflicts ended up into I won't say peace deal, but a water deal, rather than going into a water conflict. What we also see is that this is almost never generating an international conflict. So countries will never go to war with each other, but what we see that is internally, this is where I would say the potential for conflict is the largest. I remember about 5-6 years ago, Iraq was up there. Iraq was up there as the countries with the highest potential or the highest number of water-related conflict. Yemen was second. So, everything happens for a reason, I would say, at some point. Showing you again that next to many, many other factors which led to insecurity, instability, and conflict in those regions, well, access to water might be one. But what we see, and you might say a bit more about that, is that there is also a potential for peace, or at least agreement to access the water resource, the fresh water resource. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serge, and thank you so much for finishing on a slightly optimistic note rather than all the doom and gloom picture that the ETR is giving us this year. And also, I would like to invite everybody here in the room, but also online, kind of think how these topics actually connect to your different contexts, because not all of us are working on environment as such or on water security more particularly, but this will I always say that the environmental challenges, environment and security nexus is going to somehow touch us one way or on another. And I really think that people in this room, again, in person and online, kind of have the responsibility to think about these issues already now, so that they don't come back and affect us more than they should. We will now move to you, Laura, and I would like, because Laura was one of the authors of the report, right? Like you contributed, the world, Geneva Water Hub did contribute. So, but hearing your views from the point of view, of course, of the research community, but also maybe the policy-making community that you were connected to even in the past, and now with the Geneva Water Hub. So the floor is yours.
Thanks for the invitation. And yes, indeed, we did work with IEP on this World Bank report. And yeah, I think a lot of the material that came through in this year's Ecological Threats Report, resonates what we had been finding as well. So really just to commend, I think, what the report does particularly well for us, the Geneva Water Hub, is capture the nuance and complexity of the situation, this kind of holding multiple truths at once. On the one hand, yes, water is correlated with more conflict and violence, and very well put in terms of aggravating issues, accelerating, amplifying, framing existing potential conflict hotspots. And on the other hand, there is lots of examples of cooperation and peace. So kind of holding that not necessarily tension, but juxtaposition. And actually, I have it here because in the executive summary, it says the main finding of this year's report is the unexpected and sometimes divergent relationships between water and conflict. So that really strikes a chord with us. And our interpretation of that at the Geneva Water Hub, for example, is that water stress has a way of revealing underlying issues, right? So for example, say there was already a kind of governance system in place in which multinational companies have these permits to extract water that are never put into question, et cetera. Well, that's not necessarily going to change when the drought strikes. That's going to continue functioning as the status quo when the drought strikes. And then it becomes a crisis, right? And then it becomes, okay, well, why is the company getting water at the sake of the local community or whatnot? Or, who's present at these water committee meetings? Those sorts of things, questions about procedural rights as well that are maybe been neglected for too long. And then when crisis hits, it becomes obvious that there are whole parts of the population whose needs are kind of being neglected. And then again, the report also emphasizes how water stress can expose inequalities. So again, some communities are living in more vulnerable locations than others. Grazing rights are maybe not clearly defined in advance, this sort of thing. And then again, yeah, so in terms of cooperation, it's, we see in the report that there are few examples, not many, of full-blown water wars per se, which was sort of anticipated decades ago. At the same time, at Geneva Water Hub, we do see, while that remains true, we do see continued conflict. It's not always international, sometimes it's subnational between different communities. But, we have a WhatsApp group, of course, of colleagues, and it's kind of constantly new articles about water stress, water tension, water conflict. Most recently, a colleague shared this week about how water drought is certainly fueling the protests in Iran. There's been 7 years of drought. The reservoir levels there at the moment are, I think, at 10% of their capacity. So there, we can't deny that it's a factor in a lot of in conflict and violence. So to maybe say a couple of remarks, maybe a bit more scientifically, not about our WhatsApp group. We've done, last year we published a systematic review of the literature connecting water and peace. And so that's how you kind of do it, right? You have these terms and their synonyms, and you say, okay, well, in the last 10 years, what kind of research has been connecting these concepts, well, these terms, these words. And what we've done, it was published in Environmental Science and Policy, and we ended up unpacking 7 different pathways where some sort of water intervention can lead to more kind of cooperative or coherent outcomes. And some of the pathways were things like, and I'm going to develop on this more, but certainly a very important one is developing and sharing rules about the use. Recognizing this shared dependence on natural systems. That, okay, it doesn't, upstream and downstream are actually equally, are both dependent on the resource. This idea that shared projects can bring peace, so shared investment into infrastructure or shared investment into, a canal network, for example, can bring material benefits, but also symbolic benefits. This is that sort of symbolism of working together that can help stabilize relationships. The idea that post-conflict, there can be the return to normalcy through establishing reliable water systems that can contribute to peace. Spreading international norms that are linked to water. So we have someone here from human rights. So, if we're also at the same time as spreading water messages tied to human rights norms and access and human rights language, that can also, so these are some of the pathways we found. And I do want to just say, because obviously the report doesn't go much into rules and governance, so I just wanted to add that, emphasize that point from the perspective of Geneva Water Hub, because there's a lot of evidence that when we establish good rules for sharing water, for protecting water, that can go a long way in preventing conflict. At the transboundary level, we have international agreements. There's a international water law, which is a branch of environmental law, which puts forward principles of good practice, duties to inform, no harm, sustainable development. One quite particular to water use is called the principle of reasonable and equitable use. And then, of course, it also has sort of procedural aspects like conflict resolution mechanisms and whatnot. So the importance of good treaties can't really be overestimated in today's climate. Many of them need to be updated, and we've in some cases worked with countries on that. But I can just cite a few examples. I mean, we need on the Ganges, this is a treaty being updated. The Indus River, the Colorado River is currently being updated. The Tehran Convention, which governs the Caspian Sea. They all need to be brought up to date for the new challenges, because if they were built, if they were designed 30, 40 years ago, the challenges have changed in terms of population, in terms of uses, in terms of climate change. At the national and subnational level, the governance questions are all about getting prioritization in place. So what are, in a context of drought, what are the priority uses? And then it's one thing to put those on paper, but then how does that actually get implemented in practice? And that's where I think the report from Ecological Threats Report does a great job of emphasizing the importance of infrastructure to actually put in place all of these good notions. Okay, most countries have somewhere in some part of either the constitution or kind of state level laws and policies, they'll have some prioritization of uses saying, okay, there's drinking water and then, agriculture and then industry and then go down. But really, when push comes to shove, implementing that's not something that can happen in a crisis situation if it's not being really thought through. And with this alignment, and I like to think of kind of strategic alignment of infrastructure policies that are kind of nested to support that, is really essential. And a term that I like a lot these days is this idea of anticipatory governance, and that's very relevant to managing water risks. Based on certain scenarios, how can we get ahead of these seasonal shocks that are, as in these intense periods of rainfall or lack of rainfall? So is it about reallocating water, maybe getting it from one sector of the economy to another? Is it about choosing different crops, crop insurance? Is it about making new agreements with neighbors? Holistic water management and storage. And again, just to emphasize this point about infrastructure, because indeed, if you can't store it in many parts of the world, you can't use it. And so it doesn't mean we have to follow the models of the past with these mega dams. We've learned a lot about that type of infrastructure. And a lot of new sort of environmental social safeguards are in place for big dams. But B, there are more options than that, with like smaller integrated storage systems where you're using a combination of groundwater and surface water, where you're using more nature-based solutions, nature-based infrastructure. So we've learned a lot, but storage is absolutely essential and can't be. I don't want to live in a country without water storage. I don't know about you, but so voila, those are some points I wanted to make. Then finally, I just wanted to make some points about Geneva Water Hub's experience about supporting social cohesion and cooperation. So we work with countries, stakeholders, communities around the world, and there's really no substitute for sitting together around the table, letting different groups express their concerns, their fears, real or projected, at transboundary and local levels. And so on an international level, we've worked with, for example, the countries of the Senegalese Mauritanian aquifer system to help them understand the dynamics of their aquifer, to come together, which ultimately resulted in a ministerial declaration. It's one of the first in terms of managing shared aquifers. Aquifers are trickier, out of sight, out of mind. We don't always know how to go about sharing. There can be science gaps, but then also just kind of in the collective, unconscious, it can be hard to imagine them. Then there's the importance of joint evidence collection. So something we do quite a lot at Geneva Water Hub is hydropolitical baseline reports. So where we'll work with local universities or research groups or government ministries to together develop a sort of an understanding of current and future hydrological challenges and risks. And just that process, right, of working together. Okay, where do we get the data? Whose data do we trust here? Okay, where do we store the data? What version of that past event do we agree on? It's just the process of that itself goes a long way, I think, to bringing people around the table and trust building. And that's the experience that we've had so far at Geneva Water Hub. And then lastly, just to say again, the importance of research. We do mostly social science research at Geneva Water Hub, though we work with natural scientists also. And it's always, I think, social science has a lot to offer in this domain because it's all understanding historical arrangements for water, understanding patterns of equity, understanding political prioritization, policy cycles. So even in this kind of dark chapter for research, we're going to try to keep going.
Thank you so much, Laura. And three things came up to me, stood out from your presentation. The aspect of anticipatory governance that we really don't do enough of. Just a brief mention of the nature-based solutions. I'm a big fan of those because I think that we are kind of over focusing on new technologies and how new technologies can help us, while we really have a great resource in nature, and nature-based solutions are something that is really underdeveloped and under-invested in. And of course, this working across different stakeholders, something that we don't do enough of, especially right now in the current period. Also, very much impressed with everything that the Geneva Water Hub has done since its inception. I was there, when you were opening your office here in Geneva, and yes, and it was really, it's really amazing to see what you have done, and and all the great things you're going to do in the future. Now, last but not the least, we come to our last speaker, Sabouch Ahmed from the permanent mission of Bangladesh. And as I said in my introduction, I think it's really important to hear exactly from your experience, a country that is really exposed to all these risks, compound, if I may say. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Anna, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to speak before you at this event that is focusing on the findings of the ETR 2025. The discussion is timely, definitely. Particularly, it has highlighted on the water-related risks. I thank the Geneva Center for Security Policy for organizing this forum and inviting Bangladesh Mission, particularly the ambassador, as we are already informed that ambassador unfortunately had to regret at the last moment, so that is why I had to step in. I also thank Mr. Sarge and Dr. Laura for their insights drawn from the report. I will also be expressing my gratitude to the Institute for Economics and Peace for producing the 6th edition of the report, which provides vital evidence on ecological pressures and resilience worldwide. The report has elaborated on 4 indicators, that is about food insecurity, natural hazards, demographic pressure, and risks related to water. I will not be covering the top 3. I will be focusing on our findings on the sub-indicators related to water risks and how the findings relate to the national context. Context meaning how in Bangladesh we are having water-related problems and opportunities also. So I will be presenting that perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, water availability is a core concern as highlighted in this report. The ETR's water risk indicator measures pressure on renewable freshwater relative to human demand. It identifies regions where scarcity, over-extraction, and seasonal variability threaten ecological stability and livelihoods. Globally, renewable freshwater per person has declined sharply from nearly 18,000 cubic meters per year in 1950 to just over 5,000 cubic meters today. Population growth has outpaced water availability, creating competition and increasing ecological pressure, especially in densely populated regions. Freshwater withdrawal patterns vary globally. Annual withdrawals total nearly 4,000 cubic kilometers, about 10% of renewable water, with agriculture accounting for over 70%. Industrial and municipal use makes up the remainder. Per capita withdrawal has declined since 2008 due to efficiency improvements mostly in the high-income countries. But water scarcity remains critical in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Central and South America. The report emphasizes that freshwater withdrawal is not just a measure of use, but a signal of ecological threat. Efficient management, governance, and equitable distribution are essential to reduce risks. Excellencies, Bangladesh reflects these global trends. As a densely populated country, it is experiencing a declining per capita freshwater. Water scarcity is acute during the dry season when river flows drop and groundwater levels decline. Agriculture dominates water use, while domestic and industrial consumption is smaller. Seasonal variability and extreme rainfall from monsoons, intensified by climate change, further strain water resources. As the ETR notes, when water withdrawals approach or exceed sustainable supply, then risks increase. Effective governance, improved irrigation efficiency, rainwater harvesting, and equitable water distribution are critical to managing these stresses. Ladies and gentlemen, rainfall seasonality is another key dimension. It describes how rainfall is distributed throughout the year. Low seasonality means rain is fairly evenly spread. High seasonality, as in monsoon climates, concentrates most rainfall in a short wet season followed by long dry periods. Seasonality is a natural climate feature, neither inherently good nor bad. Its impact depends on ecosystems, human adaptation, and infrastructure, as well as how extreme or unpredictable rainfall patterns are. ETR 2025 finds that rainfall is increasingly concentrated in fewer months. Wet seasons are wetter, dry seasons longer and drier, even if total annual rainfall remains unchanged. About 2 billion people now live in regions experiencing moderate to severe increases in rainfall seasonality. Intensified seasonality acts as a risk multiplier, particularly when combined with water scarcity, high population density, or weak governance. It increases social stress, resource competition, displacement, and agricultural uncertainty. Excellencies, in Bangladesh, rainfall seasonality has historically been beneficial. Farming systems and ecosystems have evolved around the monsoon. However, the country experiences very high rainfall seasonality, dominated by South Asian monsoon. About 70 to 80% of annual rainfall occurs between June and September. Pre-monsoon months bring storms, while the dry season from November to February receives very little rainfall. Most rain falls in just 3 to 4 months. This extreme concentration, along with high population density and climate change, increases risks. Intense monsoon rain raise flood hazards, while longer dry periods intensify water stress. In Bangladesh, rainfall seasonality is manageable only with strong adaptation measures. This include flood-resilient crops, adjusted cropping calendars, improved drainage and embankments, rainwater storage, and early warning systems. In terms of third risk indicators, that is shared water systems, ETR 2025 also examines the shared water systems. For example, transboundary rivers, lakes, and aquifers. The report finds that shared water resources are more often a basis for cooperation than conflict. Most countries sharing water do not experience higher conflict simply because water is shared. Treaties, joint commissions, and informal cooperation help manage seasonal variability, allocate water, and reduce uncertainty. So-called water wars are rare. Conflict risks increase when ecological pressure intersects with fragility. Drought, rainfall variability, and water scarcity act as risk multipliers. When combined with weak governance, poor infrastructure, rapid population growth, or political tensions. The ETR emphasizes that shared water systems are not inherently conflict-prone. A strong adaptive governance is crucial to prevent ecological stress from escalating into instability. Excellencies, Bangladesh illustrates these findings. The country lies downstream of the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, shared with India, Nepal, Bhutan, and China. Despite ecological pressures from monsoon variability, floods, and dry season scarcity, Bangladesh has avoided large-scale interstate water conflict. Water sharing is managed through treaties, technical cooperation, and diplomatic engagement. It may be noted that Bangladesh joined the UN Water Convention in June 2025, becoming the first South Asian nation to do so. By doing so, we aim to secure sustainable, equitable management of our vital transboundary rivers like the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna system, and strengthen water security amidst climate challenges and upstream pressures. However, extreme rainfall, climate impacts, high population density, and limited infrastructure increase local level risks. Water acts as a risk multiplier, reinforcing the need for strong governance, regional cooperation, and community adaptation. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the ETR 2025 sends a clear message. To safeguard humanity, we must strengthen ecological resilience, promote sustainable resource management, and ensure adaptive governance. Proactive cooperation, equitable distribution of resources, and climate adaptation are essential to prevent ecological pressures from escalating into social instability and conflict. Bangladesh's experience demonstrates both the opportunities for cooperation and the vulnerabilities highlighted in the report. With sound policies, planning, and partnerships, we can manage water risks, rainfall variability, and ecological pressures to build a safer, more resilient world for all. I thank you all.
So much for putting actually the ETR findings in the context of Bangladesh. And what I find really inspiring is the story of Bangladesh, of how when I started working on these issues, Bangladesh was one of these kind of victims of climate change, and how it became kind of the empowered country in the region who actually a lot of high-income countries, specialists are learning from your experiences in managing water and managing these risks. So thank you so much for contributing to this discussion, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions to you as well. So now it's time to open the floor to the public here, but also online. What I would ask you to do is to introduce yourself when you ask the question. There is not going to be mics circulating because we have the technology saving us, so the mics are in the ceiling. I'm going to stop using this mic right now. Yes, please.
Gaëtan Magne, Center for Finance and Development at the IHED. You mentioned the crisis prevention and the drought response in your talk. I was wondering if you were aware of any publicly available reports on stress tests done on droughts on various geographies.
Any other questions for this round? If not, Laura, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting work on drought, and the FAO and IFAD, the food organizations of the United Nations, they have a lot of good resources and also lead a working group now on this topic. So you can maybe, using those keywords, look up some of their work. Another resource I look to quite a lot is a World Bank report. I can find it now while another question comes up, but I think it's maybe High and Dry or something like this. Do you know the report? Yeah, I can find it, but there's an excellent report from Richard Domania and some others from 5-6 years ago as well on drought and on getting this kind of anticipatory governance thinking. Not only, I mean, we think, certainly for agriculture, but also sometimes we underestimate the impact of droughts on urban areas too, on cities, on small businesses. It's really widespread. And this report, the one I'm thinking of in particular, does a good job of framing it as this slow onset crisis. More than a flood, it's less immediately dramatic, but can be can really undermine the ability of communities, businesses, farming, to thrive over the long term. And of course, there can be acute events related to drought, but it's really this idea that it's slow burning onset that can really aggravate underlying conflicts. That needs to have some attention.
Thank you, Pooja.
Yeah, can I adjust a little bit?
Of course.
No, because you spoke about conflict prevention and resilience also. I think that's how we measure resilience in the Ecological Threat Report. So it's based on a concept of positive peace. So what is this? Well, it's basically looking at the institutional structures and attitudes necessary to create peaceful societies. How was it created? So we basically took 50,000 data sets we managed at the Institute, filtered out those indicators most related with peaceful societies. They came out in 8 islands, which became the 8 pillars of positive peace. It's systemic, it's interactive, that's how it works. What really struck me is that within both your interventions, you mentioned things like good governance, or high levels of good governance, good relations with the neighbors, an equitable distribution of resources. And I can go on, but those are 3 of the 8 pillars of positive peace. And I can go on. So basically, maybe without knowing, or you might be a specialist in positive peace also, you already touched upon, also sound business environment, low levels of corruption. You spoke about that also. So those are all pillars of the 8 pillars of positive peace. So without knowing, you already identify what needs to be done to create stronger and more resilient societies, which eventually will not lead to conflict, will do some form of conflict prevention and increased resilience also. So I was really struck listening to both of you that you were already taking part of positive peace and different pillars to find solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Thanks very much. It's Victoria Walker, working with Kujinta. Thanks very much for the presentations. The one area that I didn't hear about is around the flip side, the resilience side, but particularly the private sector, both in terms of large scale, but also in terms of sort of more localized entrepreneurial interventions. I mean, this, what you've described there is an extreme disruptor, and disruptive environments often bring around innovation and solutions that come through that. You mentioned yourself around these 2 different elements of the impact of water scarcity. One was scarcity, the other one was actually how do you deal with it, and the absence of infrastructure, processes, equipment. So I'd be interested to hear whether or not or how anyone is investing in this space. For example, be that through the World Bank, be that through sessional funding, sovereign debt, etc. Even in a large-scale multinational investment. But then also if there are any examples of more sort of localized startups, entrepreneurial approaches that are dealing with this, whether through tech or whether through the nature-based solutions. And we know that we've seen that there's quite a an advancement in nature-based solutions and sustainable finance, for example. So I'd be quite interested to hear if you have anything on those areas. Thank you.
Would you like to start?
Yeah, I would say so. So part of your questions about these local solutions, we always think that the local solutions are the best solutions, and you need to be able to scale them up at some point. And we see that those local solutions would, most of all, or best of all, be low tech, low key, low finance. I'm thinking about, because the IEP is basically a sister organization from a charitable foundation under a larger, I would say, family foundation. So we are able to influence both. And with this charitable foundation, the founder of the institute is doing a lot of charitable work throughout the world, mostly Africa and Asia also. And a couple of years ago, it was also in the ETR, but that's something he's still supporting, is this idea of sand dams, which basically would cost around 50,000, but really provide you with water captation, water management, water filtration, whatever, for a period of about 50 to 100 years. So it's a small investment for the amount of time that you can use it, and really find a solution for this erratic rainfall and keep it when it falls, and then manage it afterwards. So what we see, that's the focus would lie on those low tech, low key. I think what is important, I'm not going to take your part, Laura, but you already mentioned the fact that, you spoke about these basically low levels of good governance or bad governance, with these treaties not being reviewed, or the collaboration for extraction or whatever not being reviewed, because we know that a lot of extracting industries need a lot of water also to be able to function. Yeah. You already spoke about it, so I'm going to stop there. But yeah, low key, low tech, low finance. There are solutions, but you need to be able to scale them. And what we see at the Institute for Economics and Peace is that you're basically missing at some point this meso level. As well in terms of scaling up from the lower level, in this idea of understanding what's happening there and scaling up to a high level, but also in financial terms, going from maybe those 5,000 euros microcredit to maybe 500,000, while on the other side you have basically a more multilateral UN-led intervention, which I would call more stratospheric, with millions and billions, but not really effective on the ground to really help people on a daily basis. So, and it's not a critic at all. It's just like, this is how the system works at the moment. So where is this meso level connecting both extremes, I would say? But the real solutions are on the ground.
Yeah, I can just say that, absolutely, traditionally, places that have experienced long-term water stress or shortage, arid, semi-arid regions, indeed, you find a lot of ingenuity in these places. Ancient water harvesting systems in Rajasthan, in Spain, very innovative water sharing arrangements that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, where water, maybe more on the governance side, where water is kind of alternated between different fields. So traditionally, water stress leads to ways to cooperate. And there was actually a study quite recently that showed that the lower levels of the water table, the higher traditionally cooperation has had to be. So that exists, and I would say, today you see a lot of investment into maybe desalination now in these regions, in arid regions or in semi-arid regions. It comes with a new set of problems, but it's been there's quite a lot of tech investment getting these membranes that are more efficient, and into reuse of water. Do we need the same quality water in agriculture that we use for municipal purposes? No. So getting that in place with the right regulations and safeguards, you see this kind of investment. And then, different types of storage infrastructure, some of the ones that I mentioned earlier that don't have to be the same model of the past, but maybe a more integrated, maybe smaller scale, maybe using natural storage capacities in aquifers or wetlands. Things like this. And then maybe one thing to add is that, yes, private sector has a big role, and there is a pretty active community talking about how to kind of, leverage private sector investment. At the same time, it's really a sector where, it's not immediately interesting from a revenue perspective, always, the water sector. It's not immediate, you're not always getting your immediate return on investment as an investor. So it's really the government role in financing water infrastructure can't be underestimated. Most of our countries in Europe, Canada, where I'm from, the US, they all built water on the back of a huge public subsidy. So sometimes my feeling is that we, need to continue to just insist that it's a public good that the government needs to really get behind.
Yes, I can add in terms of
local solution to the challenges coming from this ecological deviation or variations. Bangladesh is a riverine country, as I have mentioned in my presentation, that we are having the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna system. That is a big one. We have big rivers, just to give an impression that at one place, if I stand, the width of that river can be even 10 to 12 kilometers. So from here, I cannot see the other side of that river. So it is just so much wide. So during a particular time, as I have mentioned, the concentration of rainfall becomes so much, and sometimes we receive so much of water from upstream, from neighboring country, because at that time they cannot hold it with their dams. So just they open it, and with this dual factor, we see flooding in Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, flooding are big in volumes, and people are not afraid. That is what I am talking about. People are not afraid. From our childhood, we are confronted with that reality. So we have local knowledge that are imparted among the people. So how to cope with this flooding and how to adapt to the negative effect of that flooding. So it is within our collective psyche from the very beginning. And one good point is that this flooding is also sometimes beneficial for our agriculture. It brings lots of silk. And with that, we are having more than 170 million people, and we are producing enough of our food grains. And this is because of this fertile land. And thanks to this sales from time to time coming through that flood water. So that's how we are facing. In terms of local solutions for the community resilience, I would like to highlight another point. We do also suffer from big cyclones. You may have heard about Sidor, Ayla. We have experienced just a couple of years ago. So what we have found out that the impact of those cyclones are minimized due to natural barrier. The barrier is sometimes in our southern part. We call it Sundarbans, the biggest mangrove bonds. It just it is a natural barrier to that natural hazards. And based on that experience, the government long ago took a policy to create coastal belts along the line of the sea. That belt is created by the trees, plantation of trees. So that's how we are trying to cope with that natural hazards and other ecological threats we are facing.
Can I come?
Of course.
Maybe three more examples. So absolutely. I mean, I just saw, I think 2 days ago, like one of these big rivers documentary on BBC, and it was about the Zambezi. And really saw like, so half the year the kids like walk to school and play football, and the other half they just use pirogues or boats to get to school also. And it's super adapted. So as you say, populations are really adapted to that. To come back to your point about entrepreneurship and industry, two examples came to my mind. You know, when we talk about water stress, it's not only in those countries, in those regions of the world that I spoke about. I come from I'm from Brussels, which is a very special part of Belgium. But we have this policy in Belgium, which is called beton stop or concrete stop. Why? Because we have water stress. I mean, you know, it's raining all the time in Belgium. And the only thing we hear is that we have aquifer issues in Belgium. It's like, excuse me, it's raining all the time. The problem is half of Flanders, especially Flanders, half of Flanders or more, it's concrete. So even if it falls a lot, we can just not keep it. It flows very quickly back to the sea or in the river or whatever, but not where we want to have it. So I think industrialization or entrepreneurship or industry is having this form of impact. And this is where you need to make decisions. I have heard about this policy of beton stop or concrete stop for 10, 15 years, and we're still not there. We can still not stop putting, whatever, have another, and we like to always have, in Belgium, we like to have an individual house on a big parcel and everything. So this is a way that I think is long overdue. We need to review the way we live, where we live, how we live, and how we use water when we do that. And then the second example, to my mind, when you link it to economic growth or to growth as such, is the Gulf region. Yes, of course, in the UAE, they're like together with the Dutch specialized in the micro watering of crops and everything. But that's not going to provide them with enough food for the entire population. It's not, especially not with the growth of the population of the past 50 years. So what we see now is they not import water. They stopped really massively taking the salt out of the water, salinization.
Desalination.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So they stopped basically taking the salt out of the water, which at the end of the day, and I was in Qatar in December and I spoke about this, the guy said, well, the byproduct is that it's salt, so you need to put it somewhere, which is back into the Persian Gulf, right? Which is maybe not a good idea at that scale. So they're not importing water or not creating more water, they basically buy it or buy land, mostly in Africa and other parts of the world, where they basically grow crops which they then import into the Gulf region also. So you can only imagine that this is also maybe good for them, but definitely not good for the populations where this is happening. And I'm not even entering into EU regulations, which makes prices, whatever. But so yeah, they're also like, we solve our problems, or several parts of the world solve their own problems by, basically moving it to those parts which are already the most under pressure also, but of course have one of the best on the ground possible to do that.
We are still open to questions. Our online public is very shy, so I have not received anything. So if there are no more questions here in the room, and please reflect, so maybe something comes to your mind. I wanted to ask you the question that I mentioned in my introduction about keeping the momentum of focusing on these issues while we are witnessing this upheaval in the world, because I really have the impression that we are kind of forgetting about, kind of ignoring reality of these challenges, and these challenges are not going to disappear, and rather accumulate and come back to hit us with much more force. So I wonder if you have any ideas on how to, maintain momentum or increase momentum, but including also investments. Because I have the impression, everybody is preparing for a war in this world, and kind of forgetting that there are other things that we have to invest in. So
I'll start, okay.
Challenge.
No, it's fine. I always have this easy answer ready for that. When you speak about momentum, and when I look at the four core reports which we produce every year, which would be the Global Peace Index, which measures what we call negative peace, which is the absence of violence or the fear of violence. Then we have Positive Peace Index, we have the Global Terrorism Index, and we have this Ecological Threat Report. Until a few years ago, I was saying that the only positive report was the Terrorism Index. It's also changed because we plateaued, it's getting worse again. So each of those four reports are deteriorating. So we are, for example, for the Global Peace Index, we have seen 13 deteriorations in the past 18 years, 17 years. So conflict is the driver for that, and now we see that militarization is also supporting this, right? And when you talk about militarization, we talk about what? About steel, energy, and then the effect of militarization, which is also negative for nature and basically the problems that we spoke about. I explained to you that the Ecological Threat Report, we saw this degradation, more countries deteriorated and improving, and still systemic degradation. The Terrorism Index, I explained to you, well, we went down after the crush, and look at I saw that there was again a ISIS flag on Raqqa today. So what are we looking at? So we see that there's a revolution there also. And then we come to Positive Peace. So Positive Peace is the only report where we would still see some form of plus when we talk about the results. So about plus 1%. Yeah, that's fine. But about 3 to 5 years ago, this was still 2.5% in plus. So we see there also, because of the actions of, happening in the world and the challenges, but also this refocus into hard security and hard power, we see that there also the growth of Positive Peace has been strained, and we can expect that in a couple of years from now, it will be negative also. So when you speak about momentum, we're almost joking about the fact that nobody cares about international law, human security, or whatever. All those elements of, I would say, a post-paradigm of a liberal approach to international relations. And I see that in the four core reports of the Institute for Economics and Peace, they're all negative in the approach. And this in a systemic way over years. It's not even like, we have date values. No, it's a trend. It's a trend in the Global Peace Index. We now see a shift in trend In the positive peace index, we see again figures coming up, and especially in the West and in Europe, for terrorist attacks and terrorist pressure. And of course, we see the figures that we discussed today in the Ecological Threat Report. So I would not push too much on this concept of momentum, because it's not going to my opinion, it's not going to the right direction at the moment.
And no way of changing the...
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm pushing it.
There's of course a way. I mean, you know, people always ask me if my job is easy or not. I say it should be easy. When you approach governments, when you approach international organizations, you explain to them that you can invest in peace and have economic dividend of that, and economic growth, which is not just a philosophy in positive peace. It's empirical. It's proven by figures. We see high levels of positive peace, is high levels of happiness, well-being, faster growing GDP compared to those who did not invest. All the economic indicators go up, and we see that resilience is going up also. To every normal, composed person, when we explain that, they should say, "Oh, great idea, let's do this." It's not happening. It's not happening. So yeah, I'm very positive, but maybe not this week.
Thank you.
I'll try hard, but.
Laura, thank you.
Yeah, the last point you just made is I wanted to say something along those lines, just really like, what is that work then of keeping these issues on the agenda? You know, how do you continue advocating for these issues? And I think indeed it's through these very robust narratives about the importance of ecology, water systems in particular, for security. And also the importance of these systems for the economy, because those are the language. This is the language that that a lot of they're speaking in Davos, right? So this is how it needs to be framed, and there's a bit of work underneath, but there are many organizations that are doing it. I mean, at Geneva Water Hub, we're indeed drawing attention to this issue of water and conflict, or how it can be turned around, and then also, just to blow your minds a little bit, the impact of conflicts in general on water resources. So this is really undermining the ability of communities to rebuild, to be robust during war, post-conflict. If the water system has been obliterated, the dams have been blown up, the water treatment plants have been blown up. This is also a key issue. It's a bit the reverse, right? But it's very present and happening much too frequently around the world at the moment. And then from the economics perspective, there are many reports that have now tried to put dollar values on the benefits that water can bring to the economy. I mean, it's everything, right? If you think about it, but still, it helps sometimes to come up with these figures. Okay, well, all of our global shipping and all of our agriculture, all of the microchips. I mean, everything, right, requires a water input, more or less. So putting numbers to this and making the business case for how much it undermines our economies also is a way.
Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, we are entering an era that will be defined how states are just overwhelmed considering about their traditional security. So that is a very, very negative development. In terms of your question, you are hinting at momentum. So momentum is for traditional security. States are enormously under stress. The normative order that we have seen after the World War II, that is under stress. So that is why funds will be diverted to some other purpose. And for coping with these ecological threats, these are taking a backseat. That is a problem. I just want to refer one statistics given by the UN Secretary General. In his report on related to security, he has mentioned that in the coming decade, total global arms expenditure will be reaching between 4.7 to 6.5 trillion US dollar. Right now, just next past year, we spent 2.7 trillion. So it is more than double even. That report was prepared at a time when we did not see so much of stress in our normative order, the way right now we are observing. So that is very dangerous development.
So we shouldn't be talking about momentum, but rather revival of these issues,
Yes,
kind of bringing them back to the agenda.
Status quo.
Do you have a question? Do you have addition to this?
Question to Dr.
Okay, so I will give you the floor after Serge.
First of all, Thank you for quoting the Global Peace Index with your 2.7 trillion, that's true. But I think what we do there is measure what we call the cost of violence, which is, of course, a statistical approach to, putting a price on violence as such. We see there, or and of course it's growing every year, it's increasing every year. It's about 20 trillion PPP this year, or 2025, 20 trillion. The same thing, Doha Forum, I heard the director of UNDP explain to people there that the development gap, so the money we need to basically organize and deal with all development issues in the world, is 4.3 trillion. That's a political decision. Where do I put my money? Where do I put my money? And of course, what really strikes me there is when you look at the distribution of these investments, annual investment of 20 trillion, it's 80% in violence containment, 80% in violence containment. So 45% in the military, growing, 30 to 35% in internal security forces, police, paramilitary, whatever you want to call it, growing. 6 to 8% in private security, military and security company, growing also. So that's the point. This is where basically when you come back to this essence of a systemic definition of peace under positive peace, it is like, where do I put my money? Do I continue with a vicious cycle, or do I one day think about creating more stable societies in which people will basically have less grievances and frustrations, which might not lead to violence, could be addressed by mediation negotiations. So you don't need to invest in violence containment to counter violence, and all those financial assets can be reinvested into development, whatever you want to call it, or positive peace. When he said that at the Doha Forum, I was like, well, that's exactly the point. 20 trillion, and that's an estimation in every year in violence, 4.3 trillion to deal with the entire development problems in the world. So this is why you want to put your money. So that's the exact point where you want to put your money. And then another reflection, it's also, when I walked in, I saw that level -1 there is from the Graduate Institute, there is a conference on 4 Ps. So public, private, and I would add the philanthropy partnership, right? So the new wave of the last, spoke about momentum, the new wave of the last year or the year and a half was to say, hybrid warfare, and it's the whole of society which is basically under attack. So basically the private sector is under attack also. So we need to tell them about geopolitics, geoeconomics, tell them that they are anyhow, if they want it or not, actor of conflict or actor of international relations. We can also try to tell them how to get out of there and become actor of peace or becoming actor of something more. After what I've seen at Davos in the past 2 days, I think they're absolutely aligned with the other side, right? With the dark side. Because we live, and you're absolutely right to say, we live in this new world. International relations are basically very realist, absolutely transactional and mercantile, which is perfect for this type of industry, this type of, private sector, private business, aligning with, following, and the stronger your business, the stronger your international relations also. So we try to engage, we try to explain, but it's only with the governments that we have issues talking about positive peace, to be honest. So yeah, momentum, I think we will need to create it ourselves.
Good one. Questions?
Yes, as we are facing this ecological threat in accelerating conflicts and displacement as well as inequality, we have prepared 3 main focal demands as International Rights Council. But I would like to first, as you mentioned, Dr. Porter, that you have received reports from the human rights. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
On reports we've received. We work quite a lot with the Special Rapporteur on human rights, water, and sanitation. They feed back into their reports that they're preparing. They also inform our work quite a lot. And we see this as absolutely essential. I think we also like to frame peace in terms of positive peace, which is not just the absence of violence, right? But all this package around the structural conditions for equality. And within that, human rights is
including certain solutions on conflict mandates, for instance, between, 2 states in this matter. It was included or not?
Human rights.
Yes.
This is a key question, and I could probably defer to some of my legal colleagues who would be able to
Because
respond
this is
even
what,
better. But
what we are preparing, this in my
Yeah.
three focal main demand points that I will discuss with you later if you would
listen,
like
I'd be
to.
happy to follow up because
Yes,
it is a key. It's a question that's actually a bit gray at the moment because what is
This
the
our
obligation?
main interest and our main.
Okay.
So we'll invite you for a
Sure.
eye-to-eye conversation
But just to
afterwards,
clarify,
yeah?
the point is, what is the obligation of one state to human rights in another state
Yeah.
if the water is flowing
Yes.
right upstream to downstream? It's a very open question.
Considering access to water as a human right. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Considering a human right,
Exactly.
internationally recognized human right, how does that play out in state
Yeah,
relationship?
absolutely.
It's yeah.
We have one last question from our audience online. With extreme weather on the rise, how can we move from trying to resist nature to building infrastructure that can recover with it? So basically stopping our war on nature at the same time working with nature. Any thoughts on this one? Maybe we'll start with you.
I will skip.
You will skip this.
Okay.
Okay.
The point about
Laura?
the point about planting trees. I
Yeah,
mean, you
exactly.
kind of can't come back to some of the ways that nature has given us to retain water.
Yeah.
Wetlands, trees, forests retain soil, retain moisture in the soil better than a barren landscape does.
Nature-based solutions.
Nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
Yes, rivers that have forest, have a way of slowing percolation. So yeah, I think nature-based solutions is
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's a level of ambition. I will talk about level of ambition because when I look at the vast majority of projects, addressing those aspects, they will talk about mitigation, adaptation. Where is regeneration? Where is the ambition of regenerating? And I think so that's the level of ambition we should have there. That's the momentum we should create there also, is to say, hey, don't stop at mitigation adaptation. Let's go for regeneration, making sure that this is not a recurrent problem that we can solve this issue there. We can take that into account. Let's say look also a systemic solution to a systemic problem. So that's what we need to look for.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this question from the audience online. Unless there are no more questions or comments regarding our discussion, I wanted to thank you so much, Dr. Ola Terli, Mr. Sabuj Ahmed. A heartfelt thank you to you, Serge, the true force behind our Ecological Threat Report conversations over the years, really, because we started when the first report came out. And especially this time when the stakes for people and the planet are so high. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I wanted to thank the audience here in the room, but also online, and also to the audience that is going to watch the recording of this conversation, and kind of action point for everybody. When the video is out, please share it with your networks, because I think that we have to create the momentum, and one of the ways of creating it is to have more people listen to these conversations, kind of engage with these topics. I wanted also to thank my colleagues in the back, Bérangère and Florian, who were really the masters behind the scene who made this event possible. And of course to the GCSP for providing this excellent platform. Please come back, please stay in touch, and we see you at our next public event. Thank you so much.